Ken Long at Command and General Staff College out in the Heartland. I just want to start off by saying love and cheer to all of you wherever you are. These are not amazing times. This is just what happens when things are like this. So let's all just relax, love one another. We're going to get through this okay. All right, so all will be well. Now, why did that go off the screen? The screen show stopped for me. There we go. Okay. The first thing I want to say is what I'm going to say in the second session after this one concerning the ability to do collaboration at a distance with everybody in the sound of our voice. So Rich McConnell and Jason Ballard and I are members of the Command and General Staff College Innovations Working Group. So the Innovations Working Group. And our invitation to you is that we're ready to collaborate with anyone in ABSEL on any project at any time with anyone. Our areas of research interest are in the design, delivery, and assessment of professional education, or said another way, education to professionals. We are interested in simulations and visualization and leadership, public and private, ethics, decision-making itself, the management of uncertainty, and then anything else that you're interested in. So if you're eager or interested in collaborating with someone on anything you're interested in, I wish you would keep us in mind. You see my contact information there, and I'll just put this challenge out to you right now. There is nothing that you are interested in that we are not interested in, and there's something that we can do to help. I'll just put that bet out there, and I'm looking at you, Hugh. If there's something you're interested in, you want to collaborate on, I dare you to come up with an idea we're not interested in. You know, we'll at least be good neighbors about it. So that's kind of where we want to go with that. And so what I thought I would do is take this speed dating approach to experiential learning collaborations, and I want to talk about 6 interconnected innovations that we've been applying over the last couple of years that, in my opinion, have created a revolution in how we're delivering professional education. And I want to share what we're doing very quickly. I'm going to go deep on one of them, the visual professional development model, because I think that has the most immediate payback for people that are trying to establish a coaching and mentoring relationship with their students. And I think it's such a powerful idea that I want to go deeper into detail. So I'll talk about the visual professional development model. I'll talk about the before, during, and after approach to lesson design. That is the architecture of a flipped classroom, and I'll get into the specifics of how we look at those 3 chunks of time and the things that we try to accomplish in each one so that we can eliminate the barriers to the classroom experience. I'm fond of saying that the classroom doesn't end at the doorway. It doesn't stop when class is over, and it continues after graduation. So we're trying to develop a mindset, a learning ecosystem that treats the learning as a continuous lifelong process that connects the institution and students and faculty continuously. The fact that we're able to do this now through the good offices of University of Pittsburgh and ABSEL is a testimony to education at a distance. I'm going to describe the way we have modified the Cornell note-taking system as a way to improve lesson design, lesson delivery, student retention, faculty focus, final examination preparation, and build a deep, integrated view of our professional curriculum in a way that's been very powerful. A single page has helped us in every one of those elements. I'll then talk about the radial narrative integration technique, which helps us with the challenge we face in our professional curriculum. We have 6 different technical departments, each of which is responsible for one very detailed aspect of professional military education. And our challenge is to create professionals that have taken on board all that technical knowledge, but created a synthesis using Bloom's taxonomy, where they have walking around knowledge that is informed by all of those different perspectives. The real challenge we see of professional education taught by experts is the singular focus that each of the experts brings to the table. And when you're trying to create a general practitioner, it's not always the case that experts are the best way to teach that. So the challenge of integrating is significant for us, and this radial narrative integration technique builds on the 3 previous initiatives to help us create that synthesis of learning. I'll connect what we're doing to number 5, the gradual release of responsibility technique, and how we're applying that in practice. It was a fairly recent discovery that once we got deep into what we were doing and we looked around for some theory to justify our preconceived notions in the finest tradition, we discovered the gradual release of responsibility technique provides some academic and theoretical support for what we're trying to do in a deliberate way. And then finally, I'll wrap up talking about how the flipped classroom approach, oops, sorry about that. I tapped on the table and it advanced the slide. Didn't want that. So I'll talk about the flipped classroom 2.0 in a general way that sort of summarizes how these 5 initiatives come together to change in a real and meaningful way the way we approach educating our leaders. We're taking the philosophy that our leaders after graduation go back to Army units, and they actually function as teachers. And so we've adopted the mentality that this is a teaching college, so that our leaders aren't just certified in the skills that they know and can demonstrate, but they leave here with a toolkit that allows them to develop and coach and teach their subordinates. And we find that that shift really gets us into the flipped classroom experience. Well, this slide just insists on coming up, so I'm going to talk about that now. So let me describe the problem we have with professional education as taught by experts. So you see you should see a case study screen on there. So we have 6 different departments that have subject matter expertise and very detailed professional knowledge. We have a department of history, leadership, strategy, tactics, sustainment or logistics, and then force management, which is Army speak for change management. You can think of that as the top level, top-down strategic view of our different bodies of knowledge. On the bottom, you see what we think of as the tactical warfighting functions, which determines how effective our individual units and soldiers are. We have to be able to integrate the principles and practices of C2, or command and control, that ties together units, maneuver, which is how units traverse the battlefield, the use of intelligence, fire support, protection, and sustainment or logistics. So in each one of those 6 categories, history, leadership, and so forth, we have specialized expert practitioners who are now professors of those bodies of knowledge. We get PhDs in history and leadership and so forth. And they're trying to represent that body of knowledge to our general practitioner officers. And at the same time, when we're looking at tactical battlefield operations, there are experts in each of those functions, command and control, maneuver, and so forth. So when our experts walk into the classroom with a detailed lesson plan supported by slides and analysis, they are very much the sage on the stage. Now, when we are designing curriculum that integrates at the department level, we're actually pretty good at that when it comes to the principles level. So I've shown that as the top layer of detail as principles. The second layer down of detail is where we might apply those principles into a typical problem, and we work in an applied example to show this knowledge in action at a primitive or simple level. And then we will typically go deep into detailed analysis that provides expert knowledge about that function or about that body of knowledge. Now, in the curriculum design effort, we are pretty well connected and integrated at the principles level. So when we're talking about the principles of history, we can show how they connect to the principles of leadership and so forth on that horizontal bar. But that's about the level of integration that we get to. When it comes to working applied examples, those tend to be specialized in each of those domains. And certainly the detailed analysis gets us in that same direction. The problem we have is when the individual officer has to put this knowledge into action in the real world. The problems we have to solve in the real world don't render into stovepipes like history. It's a history problem or a maneuver problem or a sustainment problem. The real world problems we have are human problems, and they require insights from all of those domains. And yet in the schoolhouse, with a year-long curriculum, we're not really exercising multi-dimensional integration. So we recognize that that is a problem. And one of the things that we've done is by establishing a comprehensive oral and written examination that requires the students, the officers, to pull together all of these different principles and applications and ask them during the examination to integrate at their level. And then we're going to check to see if they have integrated. Our challenge is that nowhere in the curriculum have we, as the expert faculty, engaged in integration and synthesis. So we're very much asking them to pass an examination about lessons that we haven't taught. So we're not really satisfied with that, but it's getting well started. And so a lot of these initiatives that I'm going to show you are dealing with the central problem of how do you simultaneously teach expert knowledge in these stovepipes and yet achieve integration across the different layers of principles, applied examples, and detailed analyses. So that's what I want to say about the challenge to professional education that we're facing in the military education domain. I want to suggest that this is identical in form to the problem that we have in any kind of professional education. So when I talk with medical educators, accountants, finance, engineering, business design and operations, manufacturing, in each case, this is a common problem where you have subject matter experts and somewhere in the project management or internship, if you will, we try to use real world examples to help people pull things together under the guidance of a mentor or a coach. And so the insights that I'm about to share that we are applying directly to the military education experience I'm going to submit may have some payoff to other folks engaged in professional education. So I'm going to operate on that basis with your permission. Okay, so moving on. If that's the challenge, let's see if we can get to the next page here. All the clicks happened at once. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the design of lessons. I'm going to start drilling down into each of these initiatives now. So I'm going to talk about the before, during, and after of teaching plans with a focus on how do I develop leaders as teachers. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the main ideas. On the right-hand side, I'll talk about what I do specifically in the before, during, and after. So what we have are base lesson plans created by these departmental experts in their technical fields. And they're designed as structured lectures by experts. It turns out that the lesson plan as written is good enough for the whole Army to use because it's grounded in solid doctrinal material, which we take to be authoritative guidance. So we deviate from doctrine only with very good reasons. And the lessons that we design here in our schoolhouse are distributed to the rest of the Army, where about 3/4 of the Army takes our curriculum, but delivered by journeymen. So they don't have the benefit of this institution and the resident experts to answer deep questions. So they tend to be journeymen who are providing an introduction to these areas from lesson plans that are written by experts. And that turns out to be good enough for most of the Army, as evidenced by their performance in the field and in combat. But we have a special location where we have in-house practitioner scholars in this building. And so we believe that we can do more. We can get deeper. All of our future commanders are coming out of this area. So the more that we can get out of the base lesson plan, the better. And that's why we place an emphasis on going beyond the lesson plan. The lesson plan, however, is good enough for the rest of the Army to teach and survive with. And in fact, 5% of our graduates stay on to then turn around and teach this course with those same lesson plans to the next year. And the graduates of this institution can take with them our lesson plans, and then they go back to Army units and end up teaching the current state of the doctrine in units from what they've learned here in the schoolhouse. That's actually how the Army learns its doctrine, that our graduates go become organizational leaders and then through professional development sessions end up teaching the doctrine to the people. So that caused us to have an aha moment, which said we really need to approach our education process here as if we were teaching teachers. So it's not enough just to have them master the lessons internally, but we've got to equip them with the tools to be effective teachers in the world. And we recognize that because we say that the 3 pillars of professional military education are things we learn in the institution, in the schoolhouse, the self-development of a professional lifelong learner with the tools to self-assess and be self-aware and to guide their own instruction. And third, to be supporting education in units. So our officers leave here and then they're performing professional military education for themselves and for their units. So in other words, 2/3 of our professional military education is being taught outside of the institution. So the institution has to do more than just prepare them to survive our classroom. We actually need to help them engage in the world in a continuous learning organization. So we believe that if the Army is really going to be a learning organization, then they've got to leave here equipped to be teachers. At the end of all this, the bottom line up front is, I would say, through applying these different principles in our pilot programs, I'm confident in saying we've had a revolutionary improvement in student performance as measured on objective, common, substantive, summative assessment. So the basic tests that we use across the college, our students that have been in this pilot program have had measurably better performance on both oral and written and in personally reported performance. So we have a number of officers that are married to service members that are also going through the school, and some of them have been in the pilot program and some have not. And when they compare notes, we get a really good feedback from the folks who are in the pilot programs experiencing these different initiatives. The result has also been that the locus of control has shifted to the student and what sticks. They have become co-creators of their own educational experience with full power to be able to shape future lessons and to apply their insights into how we deliver instruction in the classroom. We've generated a lot of evidence and developed a lot of resources as a result of focusing on the evidence of mastery as performed by the students. So this gets to the ed theory on mastery learning. So we're generating evidence in order to measure it. And then the evidence that we gather turns out to be pretty powerful as an educational resource later on. So when I record officers giving their 1 to 3 minute elevator speeches to show that they've mastered that day's concept, and we record that, and then we put that into a library, it turns out that if other students are still not really clear or confident yet, they can listen to 15 or 30 other students addressing those concepts in their own words. And now we have the ability to go back and look at the game film. They can actually go back and look at their own performance and work on their oral presentation skills as seen from the outside. So not only is the evidence collected evidence of mastery, but it actually becomes an educational resource that's very powerful. And I've got some guys working on getting the best of those resources and preparing that as a read ahead for students next year, whether we're going to do distance learning or in person. But we're going to start with a rich library of resources already available. When we combine the before, during, and after with the radial narrative technique, we actually are training the officers in a skill on how to rapidly develop an insight into a thorny problem and then develop a systematic way to address it using all of the elements that we teach. It turns out that the Cornell Notesheet and the Radial Narrative allow us to design and deliver integrated curriculum because we explicitly put in every lesson places where the connections to the other departments' lessons can occur. So if I'm writing a sustainment lesson or a change management lesson as a lesson author, I'm physically making connections to other lessons from the other departments by coordinating with them and then showing how our material is interrelated. Now, I'm not an expert in history or in strategy, but I do know guys that are, and so we can collaborate through the design and show the pathways to how our material connects, and then that helps the students make those connections. And it turns out that teaching them these techniques help them in both oral and written communication skills, and then the comprehensive oral final exam turned out to be a piece of cake because of the approach that we took in the classroom, that they had gone through that experience 20 or 30 times already on camera. And when it came to actually performing in front of the board, they felt a sense of relief and relaxation when it finally came to it. The other achievements I would say is that students are more capable of being self-directed learners, which is important for us because we want them to be lifelong learners. So they now have the tools to be able to assess and develop, and they have a established network of collaborative learners already. So they'll take these relationships with them later, and I do a lot of collaboration with students after graduation anyway, and so we keep the classroom alive and beyond the physical limits of our installation here. Finally, the leadership skills of coaching, teaching, and mentoring are affirmed and exercised, put into practice in the way that we're now teaching in the classroom. So students work as peer instructors and peer learners, and then that helps them with their own coaching and teaching and mentoring. It allows the instructor to have personal relationships one-on-one in that same classroom, and that helps us develop our coaching, teaching, and mentoring skills. And our belief is, my belief is, that practice in this classroom doing that will help them when they get back to a unit, and now they're trying to teach this material to their subordinates. And in that relationship, we want to see them behaving as coaches, teachers, and mentors. And so that won't be the first time they do it. They will have had plenty of opportunity to do this in the classroom as a consequence of how we teach. So let me zoom over to the right-hand side now. So the way we're going to set this up in the before phase is that we're going to render this lesson plan, which is a typically 10 to 20 page Word document with all the usual administrative elements that you've come to know and love with centralized lesson planning, filled with terminal learning objectives, enabling learning objectives, and so forth. And they will typically come with 20 to 50 slides for a 2-hour lesson with detailed notes and lots of readings to supplement all that stuff. So what we now do is we take that lesson and we render it into a single one-page synthesis level modified Cornell note sheet. And then we make a 7-minute voiceover of the essence of that lesson, how it fits into the broader curriculum, how it makes connections to other departments, the key terms and concepts, and then how it will get fed forward. Turning that into a 7-minute briefing in one slide is an art form all of itself. And this actually serves as an example of what we think the takeaway ought to be, because the oral examinations tend to be 7 to 10 minute question and answer sessions. This is what 7 minutes of quality material on this topic actually sounds like. So we start with issuing them the lesson plan and all the slides. We give them a 20 to 30-minute voiceover of the slides as if we were going to lecture to those slides. And we give them the one-page Cornell note sheet with a 7-minute voiceover. And then we give them annotated readings. So I go through the readings and say with Adobe and put a note in there, or view notes in Word or view comments. And they can see what it is that I was highlighting in that reading, things I want to look at. So they essentially can read over my shoulder as we go. And that gives sort of structured expert insights into the reading. So we're not trying to play hide and go seek with the information that's in the reading, but we're teaching them how to use purposeful reading. So we issue all of that to them in a package, along with some questions and a story problem that we want them to work on. And we advise them to go through the course in the following way. Start with the Cornell note sheet and the 7-minute voiceover so you get a top-down view. Then go through the slides and the lesson plan notes and the slide lecture. Do the focused readings. Have a stab at the problem that we've assigned you to bring to class. And then before you come back in, listen to the Cornell note sheet voiceover one more time and see if that will help tie together some of the detailed work you did. Then come to class with a list of something smart to say, either in the form of questions that you were stumped on or insights where you had an aha moment, and you can share that with your partners. So that's what our before lesson plan looks like. Very structured, full of resources, and it actually is something that they could come back to later after graduation and use as the basis for preparing that teaching plan to their subordinates. So then they walk into the classroom, and we have 16 officers in groups in our teaching teams. So as an example, I will put them into 4 groups of 4 where they're going to conduct a small group peer instruction. And let's say I might have given group A one particular aspect to emphasize, and then group B and group C and group D. So I've got 4 people working on project A, if you will, or that the focus on study question A, and then 4 people working on B and C and D. So they take 20 or 30 minutes and organize their insights and their aha moments and answer each other's questions, and they create a mind map on the board that articulates their consensus vision of that material. I record that on with a high-def camera. After that 30 minutes, where I have been walking around and making sure they're not stuck or nudging them if they need it, so I'm kind of monitoring who's prepared, who's not, and help them make sure they're on track. At the end of 30 minutes, they typically have it. We then create 4 mixed groups where I take one person from each of the technical groups and mix them together. So now I have 4 groups, A, B, C, and D, times 4. Then they all go back to their boards. And then the group that is at team A, well, the person who helped build that board takes charge of then teaching that board to their 3 new teammates. So A will then teach B, C, and D in that group. At the next board, which is group B, that person takes charge of their board and briefs the other 3. So they typically have 10 minutes to cover that material. And that's going on 4 groups simultaneously. After 10 minutes, they rotate their stations, and then the person in charge of that board briefs. So we go through 4 rounds of that. And at the end of that, they've spent about 40 minutes to an hour of being the recipient of peer instruction 3 times and then being the leader of peer instruction 1 time. And that's where the real power comes from, this peer group instruction and learning. We know that from the Bloom's 2 Sigma problem, which I'm happy to talk about later. At the end of that, we're now about an hour and 20 or an hour to 30 minutes into a 2-hour class. That whole time I've been rotating, monitoring, recording briefings, looking to see who's stuck and who's not, and then taking some notes for a large group integration. We answer any large group questions or insights, and then we work on an applied problem that incorporates all of these insights. At the end of this, if it's a 4-hour lesson, we have them get into their small groups again to do peer writing improvements. So they're doing peer review on an individual project where they are applying this material on an individual effort. And then we pull them back together for the last 20 minutes or so, talk about what we've learned, what we're going to carry forward, set up the next lesson in the sequence to give them a preview of coming distractions, if I might say it that way, and make some decisions about how it went today in order to maybe adjust or adapt the way we learn or how we learn going into the future. It turns out that after about 3 lessons taught in this manner, it becomes a really powerful ritual and routine, and it gets to the point where they can't even imagine learning it in a different way. In the after section, I take their 5x8 cards where they've answered 5 feedback questions about what was best, what was worst, what was the biggest surprise, what was the biggest unanswered question, what was the best applied takeaway, and I use that to get insights into what happened through the eyes of 16 different students, and that lets me get a feel for how things went from their point of view, because I know how I thought it went, and it's almost never the same as they thought it went, and I use that to feed forward. I've had a chance to look at their structured writing and give them quick feedback on their one-pagers, which builds towards a group study effort. I collect the student and faculty videos, integrate them into our library, which now all my 32 students have, because I do this in 2 different sections. And then I share this with all of my 30 peer faculty so that they can see what right looks like, or they can hear students talking about this material so they have an idea of what we could expect officers to do. The student-driven follow-ups is based on the feedback that they have given me in writing on 5x8 cards, and so I can work with them to see how things are going or things that they want to add to their project. And we complete this profound resource base that becomes available as a study guide or a faculty development tool, not only for the folks in this building, but now we have a resource that is available to the rest of the Army, where they're teaching these lessons with journeymen or novices in some cases. We can now provide insights into expert testimony about that lesson to all of the remote campuses that teach most of the Army what it is that we're doing. And in fact, graduates from previous years have access to these insights too. So we feel like we're pushing good ideas from the institution out to the field and can be engaged in collaborative distance continuous learning in that way. So that's what I want to say about the before, during, and after teaching plan. I want to drive on to the next one, if I may. So this is the radial narrative technique. And I want you to notice that what I've done is I've placed in the middle this idea of a case study or a really good question. Imagine Hugh Cannon walked into the room and started the class with a really difficult human problem that we had to break down into pieces and analyze it and then pull it back together into some kind of comprehensive integrated solution. We might pull out each one of the wedges of that pie and realize that from the top, in each one of the dimensions, we have principles that might apply and some examples of those principles in action, some of the detailed analysis that an expert would bring. And we want to make sure that we don't go too deep by dwelling in the land of jargon or implementing instructions. We're trying to find the right level of problem-solving insight without getting lost in the weeds. Now, if each one of those departments, leadership, strategy, tactics, sustainment, force management, and history, if each one of them has that set of detailed layers of technical knowledge that might be involved, we now can coach the officers into a ritual of, here's how you start in a systematic way thinking about these thorny human problems. Maybe you start with history. Why not? Or start with leadership. Why not? Start wherever you feel like the first idea came from. So if Hugh walked in and said, hey, we need to figure out how to bring peace to the valley, I might say, well, do we have any historical examples of people bringing peace to the valley? And what was that like? And what kind of principles might history share with us? And then I might rotate around the horn and talk about leadership and then strategy and then detailed tactics, and how might I sustain that with logistics, and how might the principles of good change management be applied here? In each case, I could move out from the case study to those outer reaches, bringing in the more detailed information as it feels necessary. Now, if I was going to do an oral comprehensive exam and I have 3 minutes to think my way through this thorny case study that Hugh Cannon in all his evil intent has sprung on me, he's sneaky that way, I might have 3 minutes to walk the line, to go around the horn and pull in all those things that I really need to incorporate into my answer. And then as I'm doing that, as I'm making notes about the principles and maybe some examples, I might pick one or two of these areas to really go deep because it resonates with me. But in the end, in about 3 minutes, I might be able to put together 10 minutes of coherent narrative that represents the integrated, mature, graduate level insights that come from a process of design thinking. So I'm not doing a ritual and a formula and a checklist in as much as I am taking a systematic, disciplined, yet artful traverse around all of the ways I might think about this problem. And in 3 minutes, you can kind of go as deep as you need to, as systematically as you need to, and pull all of these things together and put together a narrative. This is called what we're calling the radial narrative technique. And by asking students to come to each of the classes with what they think would be a fair question for each technical lesson that somehow brings together insights from all of these different departments. And if you remember, I talked about designing a lesson where those connections are explicitly made. Now they've had a chance 30, 50, 100 times before they get into the final exam with good quality questions that they think are fair. It turns out that if you ask students with new material to think of a fair test question, it turns out that in critical thinking literature, that turns out to be a great way to acquire new information because it activates a creative impulse with new material. You're asking them to construct their knowledge with the end in mind. We know that's good practice. So this radial narrative technique is a way to rapidly synthesize and integrate broad bodies of knowledge and yet tie them together in a structured way, and helps our officers maintain presence and calmness in the face of adversity in that oral exam, and then bring all of these systematic bodies of knowledge together to start shaping how they might approach the resolution or the approach to this case study. So I would substitute the words case study with any interesting question that you would start a thesis defense with. Tell me what the Civil War was about. Was it about slavery or was it about economics? Well, discussion would then occur. This radial narrative technique would allow me to bring together all of the pieces of my graduate education into a synthesis answer that a professional would recognize as being comprehensive, organized, disciplined, systematic. In fact, all the things that we're asking our officers, our students to be able to do under pressure is to demonstrate due diligence, organization skills, and graduate level communication. The radial narrative technique is something that we've discovered. So now I've talked before about the modified Cornell note-taking sheet. This is what this thing looks like. If you look at the non-modified Cornell note sheet, what it does is three things. It talks about the keywords that are used in that lesson. It'll talk about the detailed level of notes that are going to be covered. And then in the bottom, in the synthesis, it would talk about the so what of it, or how do you apply it forward, or how do you use it in the world, or critical thinking questions to guide you after the lesson is over. And that's a great way to take notes. It's a great way to prepare your notes to teach. Now, what we've done is taken it one formal layer further, and across the top, I've added administrative notes where I talk about the number of the lesson and who the lesson author is and where it fits in the sequence of the curriculum over the year. In context and preparation, I might talk about the most important things to look for during the preparation, during the before phase, and maybe some of the previous lessons that this lesson will draw upon. So if they need to go back and refresh, we can. On the right-hand side, I've structured all of our department areas. So this is where, as a lesson author or as a teacher, I put the low-hanging fruit of how my sustainment or my logistics lesson connects to history. So if I'm talking about supply chain theory, I can tell them about the Napoleonic campaign in Russia and why the long supply chain and wagons in the winter or whatever, or I can talk about Valley Forge, or I can talk about the logistics challenges of Alexander the Great, whatever. I don't know anything about history, but that'll get us started. I can talk about the leadership challenges, the strategy, the tactics, the sustainment concepts, or the force management concepts that pertain to this lesson. And now this is a high-speed avenue of approach that shows the connection from my lesson to all the rest of the curriculum. And this becomes an area that they can look for to begin integrating this material. We do it from the design phase. This requires me to go talk to other lesson authors and go meet some new people. Ugh, I hate that. So in the bottom, the synthesis, I might talk about, again, the critical thinking ideas. And then in the action phase, this is where the student might be putting a note to themselves. Hey, I need to follow up on this or on that. So when I'm putting together my lesson plan, I construct my teaching plan using this note-taking sheet, and I provide that to the students with my 7-minute narrative of what's so important about this lesson that we're going to spend a couple hours talking about it. They can then use that to supplement with their notes. And I've seen folks using this in all of their classes, not just in mine. So from a design perspective, this ensures that we have systematically addressed all of the elements that are important, not just for our lesson, but how it integrates across the curriculum. So that's the modified Cornell note-taking sheet. The gradual release of responsibility is what happens when you start teaching this way in the beginning of the year, and then by the end of, I'm going to tell you 3 months later, you have moved almost completely to independent practice. So in this model, the teacher and student have roles to play in each of those 4 phases, where you start with the teacher doing most of the heavy listening and the student acquiring some of that knowledge through active listening. And then you move all the way to the right-hand side, where at the end of it, you can give them the lesson plan and the material, and then just watch them come into class, go to the boards, do their thing, brief it out, record themselves. And if there's nothing to say, then don't say it. Or you just give them some praise or tell them, hey, they're not that smart. There's more to it than what they've discovered. So you can use my 2 favorite forms of instruction, which are sarcasm and shame. Those seem to be my go-to methods of instruction. I'm just kidding, Hugh. Don't come after me. So the gradual release of responsibility turns to be what happens when you adopt this as an approach to teaching, not just lesson by lesson, although that's certainly a powerful tool in and of itself. But when you start stringing together many lessons across blocks of instruction, it takes on this quality of students becoming self-actualized learners, and it actually helps them think about how to organize their notes in a way that a lesson author or a teacher could put together a teaching plan. It sort of becomes a habit. And so the gradual release of responsibility model is certainly a way that programmatically you can look at how to teach in this manner. Let me see how we're doing on time. This is the one where I want to drill a little bit deeper. I got about 10 minutes. What I'm going to propose is I want to cover this one because this is a practical how to do coaching, teaching, and mentoring with your students using this particular tool. Okay, so this one came out of, this is the background for how I have coached my peer instructors and my graduates to use, and it puts into what I'm about to say in words on a page, so I'm not going to read it to you. What I want you to think about is the metaphor of a bullseye. And in the middle at 100%, let's suppose that would be perfect performance. When we look at our academic year, we realize there's 8 things that we have as top-level integrated performance qualities of our officers. We want them to be effective communicators who can meticulously plan, who can solve problems artfully, who can collaborate and play well with others. They can take charge of a situation that's grim. They can apply ethical judgment in the solving of those problems. They can use science when needed, as well as artful judgment. And they can use the best practices of creative and critical thinking and not be bound up in the doctrinal solutions, but they can bring some of this fresh approach together. So let's suppose that we asked officers on their first day in class to come with their understanding of where they think they are on that score sheet. You can't even get on the score sheet until you're at the 80% of effectiveness or marginal competence. And then imagine you could calibrate that to an 85 or a 90 or a 95 or 100. So we asked them to come to class in their first counseling session. Where do you think you are? And then where do you think the Army needs you to be now that you're going to become a major or a field grade organizational leader? They're coming to us as direct action leaders in charge of 100 guys and gals. And they're the expert in that skill. That's why, and they were successful. That's why they came to our school. At the end of a year, they've got to be organizational leaders, soft power users, influencing through words and deeds at a distance, using organizational power. And so that's a tremendous shift in orientation. And they don't necessarily know what the Army expects of them at that level. So this is how we begin to discover their expectations. What do you think the Army needs you to be in each of those areas? And why do you think it's important that you can write well and speak well as an organizational leader? So not only are we getting their self-assessment, but we're also beginning to understand expectation management. What do they think the Army standard is? And then through a process of negotiation and evidence and monthly counseling and informal counseling, we begin to deepen our shared understanding of what the expectations truly are. So imagine that we had these color-coded targets. You know, if you shot at that bullseye with a rifle, and you might score, and then the closer you are, the better. This would not surprise me to have a typical officer come in and say, well, I'm not all that creative and critical as a thinker, because they're humble, and I don't really speak good or write too good, but I guess I can meticulously plan at the basics, but I'm not that good. Although I'm better at artful problem solving than I am at meticulous detail planning, but I can sure collaborate with others because I'm a good team player. And if you put me in charge of this thing, I'll find a way to get through it, and I will take responsibility for the results by leveraging all the guys on my team, but I'll own the results and protect my team. And I will use ethical judgment because I know right from wrong, and I know a little bit about the science of my craft, but I hope to come to this school to learn more. So that might be a typical in-processing, humble officer who is yet confident about where they are. So if we started with something like that, I could then take a look at how in each of those dimensions we can use our curriculum to get better at each and every one of those. And I might design some educational experiences that let me get better at more of them at the same time and do multi-echelon training. So if I drew the area that connects all those points, what I really want to do is minimize the area. As I get every one of them closer to 100, I get more and more focused on the quality officer who has integrated all of these at the end of the day. If you put this as a fitness landscape, this close hill is their experience with Army challenges as a small unit leader and what they learned on how to survive. And that is different than what it takes to climb these mountains of organizational leadership. And we have to make them aware that all of these other disciplines allow us to go around this mountain road to the top, and that you're going to have to use elements of history and leadership and strategy and tactics far beyond your direct experience. You have to learn the craft of your profession in order to get to the top of this mountain, because you might be able to sprint up a hill, but you can't sprint up a mountain. You're going to have to take that long, deliberate professional journey and be encouraged by others that are further up that spiral mountain than you, and you can give encouragement to those below you. And that's why teaching, coaching, and mentoring matters. So what I would finally offer is that in general practice, you could take any of the educational outcomes that any of your graduate programs aspire to teach, whether that's MBA or marketing or accounting or finance, engineering, police, medical, whatever it may be. If you know what those top level achievement goals are, those knowledge, skills, and attribute, you could fill in the gaps here and then define what you mean by excellence in each of those areas and use this as a way to not only understand the details of the professional knowledge base and what counts as expertise, but it would also give you a vision of the holistic total person and where they are. And so that's what I want to say about that one. Yeah, as an example, this is one where we took a master's program in international relations and policy for civilians, and we said, in addition to all of those other command and general staff college qualities, we wanted to give these guys some insights into the world of diplomacy and economics and military power and information operations. And so you can have as many dimensions as you want. And as long as you use this same kind of model that you're moving towards 100, you can use this to help guide your intuition about where should I spend the next week of class or the next hour of effort, getting deeper in an area of expertise or developing some other area that is less developed so that I can be broadly effective. So this visual development model is a very nice metaphor for how to balance the challenges of professional education as a coach, teacher, mentor, and as a student. You can self-assess, you can use it to help discuss professional expectations between you and a licensed, skilled practitioner, and it not only helps as a self-assessment tool, but as a developmental tool. So that's about what I wanted to say about those 6 initiatives. What I would say is when I come back to the top level page, those 6 initiatives kind of fit together. And that's how we're now thinking about the flipped classroom 2.0. It's not just a lesson, it's not just a technique, but it can actually expand into a method, an approach, a philosophy of teaching and learning that goes beyond the institution into the world of professional practice. Because my experience has been that these things are even more powerful when you're working in a developmental session in your unit. You have an hour that's free to teach. You now have an integrated way to look at that hour as a resource to develop your people so that they can perform better on the day-to-day mission. So if we're going to be a continuous learning organization, then that means every leader and every student must see themselves as teachers and students and have the technology, the pedagogical tools to be able to conduct effective teaching in the moment. And so that's what we would offer to you from the Innovations Working Group. And again, anybody out there that wants to collaborate on anything, any project, anytime, anyone, I dare you to find something that you're interested in that we're not interested in. I'll give you a bright, shiny new quarter if you can come up with something that we're not interested in. That's my challenge to you, Hugh. I dare you. I'm putting a quarter on it. All right. So that's my time there. What I would like to do is give you a chance to digest and reflect, and send me your questions to that email. And I am happy to respond in writing or through web collaboration, since we now know how to do this. And I would toss it back over to Jen to bring this session to a close and set us up for the next one, since I've consumed all available time with the sound of my voice. So thanks for your kind attention, guys.
Hey, thank you so much, Ken. That was excellent. I guess to close out, I'll just draw everybody's attention to the chat. We've had some interesting and good feedback. Rich mentioned that the visual development model emerged from our ethics games study, and it was a result of a research challenge that the process of working yielded that instrument. Rebecca stated favorite takeaways and themes: teach with the expectation that students become teachers, gradual release of responsibility from teacher to learner. She said thank you, along with Drian. Myself also thanks you for this topic, very rich. And once again, Ken just mentioned any questions, feel free to email him. So with that being said, we're going to give everybody a 15-minute break here before we start the last session of the day. And just to let everybody know, that uses a different Zoom link in the program. So I actually myself am going to leave this meeting now, and I encourage you all to join us in the next session. All right.
Thanks, Jen. How you doing, Hugh?
Well, good.
You look good.
I would have liked